Cole Matthews has always found solace in the wide-open spaces of his family ranch, a sprawling, sun-drenched property where rugged tradition meets sustainable living. A former rodeo rider turned organic rancher, Cole pours his heart into raising heirloom cattle, cultivating native wildflowers, and most proudly, tending to a secret garden of heirloom grapes and medicinal herbs. For him, every blade of grass and every rustle of wind over his land is a testament to generations of hard work and the freedom to live on his own terms. But not everyone shares Cole's passion for independent living. In the cookie-cutter subdivision adjacent to his ranch, the Maple Grove Estates HOA has long imposed its strict vision of suburban perfection. At the helm is Kerren, a self-appointed enforcer whose pristine yoga mats and overly enthusiastic wellness retreats have become as much a part of her persona as her perfectly coiffed hair and clipped slate rules. One warm morning, as Cole was checking on his cattle and enjoying the calm rustle of sage in the wind, a sleek black car pulled up at the ranch gate. Out stepped Kerren, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning the rugged landscape with a mixture of disdain and self-righteous superiority. "Mr. Matthews," she began, her tone clipped, "I'm here to discuss an issue regarding your property's use. It has come to our attention that your ranch is not meeting the aesthetic standards of Maple Grove Estates. In fact, your land is scheduled to host a community yoga retreat this weekend, but the HOA insists that such an event must be approved by the board." Cole frowned. "Kerren, this is my ranch. I've been hosting community events here for years, yoga, barbecues, even a meditation session under the stars. I don't see how a simple retreat could be a problem." But Kerren's gaze hardened. "The rules are clear," she snapped. "Any activity that disrupts our community's serene image must be approved. And your property's rustic charm is simply not acceptable for such refined gatherings. Consider this your first and final warning. Adjust your plans immediately or face the consequences." A small group of neighbors, hidden behind the picket fences and rolling hills, listened intently. In that moment, the peaceful hum of the ranch was shattered by the sound of bureaucratic intrusion. Cole felt the weight of Kerren's edict settle over him. This wasn't just about a yoga retreat. It was a declaration that his way of life, his cherished independence, was about to be trampled by a regime that valued conformity above all. As Kerren departed in her sleek car, her heels clicking on the gravel, Cole's resolve solidified. He wasn't going to let an entitled bureaucrat decide how his land should be used. Deep down, a spark of rebellion ignited. A plan was already forming in his mind that would turn Kerren's high-handed decree on its head in the most unexpected way. The very next morning, Cole discovered an official notice tacked to his weathered ranch door, a crisp envelope emblazoned with the Maple Grove Estates HOA seal. Inside, he found a fine of $750 for violating community event protocols on his property. The letter was dense with legal language, designed more to intimidate than to inform. Standing outside his ranch house, Cole reread the notice in disbelief, while Kerren's earlier words echoed in his mind. On the property line, Kerren loomed once again, arms crossed and wearing a self-satisfied smile. "Remember, Mr. Matthews," she said coolly, "the rules apply to everyone in our community. Your unauthorized event disrupts our carefully curated image." Cole's eyes narrowed. As a man who had always respected local laws and upheld his responsibilities, he knew that the ranch was his sanctuary, a place where nature and tradition intertwined, not a sterile venue for corporate events. Determined not to be bullied, he immediately visited the local zoning office with copies of his event permits and proof of previous community gatherings held on his land. The officer assured him that there was no local ordinance barring his type of events, though he warned that the HOA was known for stretching regulations to suit its own agenda. Back at the ranch, unannounced inspectors began showing up with clipboards, measuring the boundaries of the property and questioning him about the disruptive event. Their presence, though couched in formal language, felt like an invasion of his privacy. Each inspection reinforced the impression that Kerren was pulling every string available to force him into submission. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was held at the community center. Kerren took the stage with unwavering authority. reiterating that any deviation from the approved community image would be met with fines and further legal action. "Our community standards are non-negotiable," she declared, her voice echoing off the polished walls. "If Mr. Matthews continues to disregard these guidelines, the board will have no choice but to escalate the matter." Cole sat quietly in the back, his mind racing with indignation. The fine wasn't merely a financial penalty. It was a declaration that his ranch, his livelihood, and his way of life were under siege by an institution more concerned with appearances than reality. Determined to defend his property and the spirit of community, Cole began planning his response. Every document, every conversation at the zoning office, and every invasive inspection was noted for future use. The battle lines were drawn, and Cole resolved that he would not back down. In the days following the meeting, the tactics of the HOA grew more aggressive. Kerren's initial fine was soon accompanied by an array of violation notices, targeting every aspect of Cole's ranch, from the natural, untrimmed hedgerows to the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. Neighbors began whispering about the increasingly arbitrary fines, sharing stories of similar overreach in hushed tones over coffee. Cole, determined to uncover the truth behind the HOA's actions, began an informal investigation. He installed discreet cameras along the property's perimeter and documented every visit from inspectors. Soon he noticed a disturbing pattern. Inspections always followed soon after Kerren's public pronouncements, and the fines seemed to vanish whenever anonymous donations were made to the HOA's community fund. During a late-night phone call with a sympathetic neighbor, Cole learned that several residents had experienced similar abuses: fines for trivial matters, threats of eviction for nonconformity, and even whispers that Kerren herself had been misusing HOA funds for personal gain. One disillusioned board member, speaking in hushed tones, hinted that Kerren's enforcement was less about maintaining order and more about asserting power and collecting fees. Fueled by this evidence, Cole compiled what he called the Ranch Rights Files, a binder filled with photos, video clips, and testimonials documenting the escalating harassment. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of an HOA that was less interested in community harmony and more invested in an arbitrary, oppressive system. The tension in Maple Grove Estates was palpable. At local gatherings and community potlucks, residents expressed their growing discontent. Whispers of reform and rebellion began to ripple through the neighborhood. For Cole, the conflict was no longer just about his ranch or the stolen tranquility of his property. It had become a fight for the rights of every homeowner who had ever felt oppressed by the relentless overreach of the HOA. Late one evening, as Cole reviewed footage of an inspector's overly aggressive visit, he made a quiet vow. If the HOA would not play fair, he would expose every last injustice. The mounting evidence was his weapon, and the community's whispered support was the spark that would ignite a broader movement against Kerren's tyranny. One brisk morning, Cole awoke to an alarming sight. Heavy machinery was at work on the edge of his property. His favored grazing field had been partially leveled, and the natural contours of his land were marred by deep tire tracks. Kerren's latest excuse? An emergency safety modification mandated by the HOA to improve community accessibility. It was a blatant violation of Cole's rights and a signal that the HOA's invasive tactics had reached a new low. Without hesitation, Cole gathered every piece of his ranch rights files and prepared for a showdown. At the next HOA meeting, held in the pristine, overly formal community center, Cole strode to the podium. With a calm but determined tone, he began, "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to witness is evidence of an abuse of power that threatens not only my property, but the very spirit of independence in our community." He played video clips of inspectors arriving unannounced, of machinery ripping through his fields, and of internal conversations hinting at financial misconduct. The room, filled with homeowners who had grown weary of arbitrary fines and invasive rules, fell into a heavy silence. One by one, murmurs of discontent grew louder as the damning evidence unfolded on the screen. Kerren, seated at the front with a look of barely concealed fury, attempted to interject with her rehearsed explanations. "These modifications are for the benefit of all," she insisted, but her words were drowned out by the collective realization that her authority was crumbling. Encouraged by the support of his neighbors, Cole continued, "This isn't just about a ranch or a yoga retreat. It's about our right to live freely and authentically, without being bullied by an organization that values conformity over community spirit." His words resonated deeply, and soon several other homeowners began sharing their own stories of harassment and arbitrary enforcement. As the meeting concluded, it was clear that the tide was turning. The community was no longer willing to tolerate Kerren's overreach. While Kerren tried to maintain a facade of control, the evidence had turned the narrative in favor of those who cherished their freedom and individuality. Cole's bold public confrontation had set the stage for a community uprising that would soon render the HOA's tyranny obsolete. Cornered by mounting evidence and an increasingly vocal community, Kerren resorted to one final, desperate tactic. Late one evening, with the tension in Maple Grove Estates at its peak, she dialed the police. Kerren claimed that the continuous disturbances at Cole's ranch, purportedly caused by his unsanctioned events, were a public safety hazard that required immediate intervention. Within minutes, officers arrived at the ranch. Cole, ever calm under pressure, greeted them with his credentials and a firm explanation. "There is no disturbance here, only the natural sounds of a working ranch and a community event that I've been hosting for years." The officers, sensing the absurdity of the call, left after a brief warning to Kerren about misusing emergency services. Not willing to admit defeat, Kerren then hired a private investigator, hoping to catch Cole in a compromising situation that would justify further action. However, Cole's newly installed security cameras soon captured every move of the sneaky investigator prowling the property, a clear act of trespassing and intimidation. Realizing that her covert efforts were about to be exposed, Kerren scrambled to salvage her authority. In a final bid, she organized a yoga retreat on Cole's ranch without his permission, a lavish, meticulously choreographed event intended to showcase her vision for community wellness. She expected the event to further her agenda, imposing her sterile version of tranquility upon the land. But Cole had other plans. On the day of the retreat, as neatly dressed yogis began setting up mats on the freshly disturbed grass, Cole quietly released 50 curious goats onto the property. The goats, playful and unrestrained, meandered through the retreat in chaotic fashion, nudging over yoga mats, bleating in dissonance, and sending the carefully arranged decor into disarray. Gasps and laughter erupted from the assembled crowd. The serene yoga retreat quickly turned into a farcical scene of pandemonium as participants scrambled to avoid the mischievous goats. Amid the chaos, Cole calmly projected the security footage of the private investigator's trespass onto a large screen. Kerren's final, desperate measures were laid bare for everyone to see. The combination of the goat invasion and the undeniable evidence of her underhanded tactics proved too much. Kerren's face flushed with humiliation as the community's laughter and cheers drowned out her futile protests. In that unforgettable moment, it was clear. Her reign of arbitrary control was at an end. The fallout from the chaotic goat invasion was swift and transformative. In the wake of the disrupted yoga retreat, the community of Maple Grove Estates rallied like never before. At an emergency meeting called by a coalition of fed-up homeowners, the mood was electric with determination. With video evidence of the trespassing, the invasive modifications, and the ludicrous goat release presented for all to see, the assembled residents voted overwhelmingly to oust Kerren from the HOA board. The decision sent shockwaves through the community. Within days, local authorities launched a formal investigation into the HOA's practices, exposing a pattern of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and blatant misuse of power. The old regime, built on rigid conformity and entitlement, began to crumble. Kerren's influence, once ironclad, disintegrated under the weight of undeniable evidence and the community's united outcry. For Kerren, the consequences were immediate and severe. Her personal assets, once flaunted as symbols of authority, came under scrutiny. Financial mismanagement, long concealed by the veneer of order, was revealed, and her once pristine home was swiftly listed for sale. The proud enforcer of rules had become a cautionary tale of unchecked arrogance. Meanwhile, Cole's victory was celebrated not only as a personal triumph, but as a watershed moment for every homeowner who had ever felt oppressed by the HOA. His ranch, once a battleground of arbitrary control, now stood as a proud symbol of resilience and freedom. Neighbors, emboldened by their collective success, began sharing stories of past grievances and envisioning a future where individuality was respected and celebrated. As the community dismantled the old system piece by piece, new policies emerged, ones built on transparency, fairness, and genuine neighborly respect. Cole, sitting on his porch with a satisfied smile as he watched his goats roam freely across his reclaimed land, knew that this victory was about more than just one overzealous enforcer. It was about restoring the soul of Maple Grove Estates. With the community uprising in full swing, local authorities had no choice but to act decisively against the corrupt practices of the old HOA. Investigations revealed that the arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and the overall abuse of power had no legal foundation, only the machinations of an entitled few. The city imposed steep fines on the HOA for enforcing non-existent regulations and mismanaging funds, and a class action lawsuit was quickly filed on behalf of the wronged homeowners. At a press conference held in the newly reformed community center, Cole stood before a throng of reporters and relieved residents. "Today, we've shown that no one is above the law," he declared in a measured tone. "Our community will not be bullied by arbitrary rules or corrupt practices. We're here to reclaim our rights." As court dates were set and legal documents piled up, individual board members were held accountable for their roles in the oppression. Even Kerren's longtime legal advisor found himself under investigation for unethical practices. The collapse of the old HOA structure was not merely symbolic. It was a legal reckoning that set a precedent for communities nationwide. The class action lawsuit, spearheaded by the determined residents of Maple Grove Estates, promised not only financial restitution, but also a complete overhaul of community governance. The legal victories underscored the power of a united community and signaled a definitive end to the era of arbitrary authority. For Cole, this legal triumph was the final power move, a validation of his long and arduous battle against tyranny. As the legal and public consequences mounted, Kerren's personal life unraveled in spectacular fashion. Once the unyielding enforcer of Maple Grove Estate's strict rules, she soon found herself isolated and ridiculed. The chaotic spectacle of her ill-fated yoga retreat and the viral spread of images showing 50 curious goats disrupting her precious order turned her once formidable image into a laughingstock. Financial woes quickly followed. Her prized possessions, once symbols of her authority, were seized or repossessed amid mounting debts. Rumors swirled about personal strife, whispers of a crumbling marriage, and a partner fed up with her relentless quest for control. The very community she had once terrorized now derided her in hushed tones and online memes, each joke a reminder that her reign of entitlement was over. In a desperate bid to salvage her dignity, Kerren attempted to secure employment in the property management field. But fate had the final say. She was offered an entry-level position as an assistant property manager for another HOA, a role that seemed less a career move and more a public admission of defeat. At a local networking event, a former neighbor couldn't help but quip, "I hope you enjoy following the rules now, Kerren." The remark, delivered with a blend of humor and schadenfreude, encapsulated her dramatic fall from grace. Cole, watching these developments from the peaceful sanctuary of his ranch, where his goats now roamed freely, felt a deep sense of poetic justice. His fight had never been solely about protecting his land. It was about defending the right to live authentically, without being bullied by arbitrary authority. Kerren's public humiliation and personal collapse were a resounding affirmation that entitlement, when unchecked, ultimately leads to ruin. In the months following Kerren's downfall, Maple Grove Estates transformed into a community reborn. The dark days of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and oppressive rules gave way to a renewed spirit of freedom, creativity, and mutual respect. Neighbors gathered for impromptu barbecues, block parties, and Yes, even spontaneous yoga sessions, this time on their own terms. Cole, still tending his vibrant ranch and sharing the bounty of his land with friends and family, became a local hero. His bold stand, punctuated by the unforgettable goat release that disrupted Kerren's hijacked yoga retreat, was celebrated as a symbol of resistance and authenticity. At a lively neighborhood celebration, a jovial resident handed Cole a handmade HOA violation notice for excessive goat liberation. Laughter and applause erupted as Cole held the sign aloft and remarked with a wry grin, "They really tried." As dusk settled over Maple Grove Estates, the echoes of past tyranny faded into memory. The community had reclaimed not only its rights, but its spirit, one where individuality was cherished, creativity was nurtured, and even the most overbearing rules could be met with a mischievous goat or two. In that final golden moment of celebration, as neighbors exchanged stories and laughter filled the warm evening air, the era of HOA tyranny came to a definitive close. The screen of a once oppressive past faded to black, a final mic drop that signaled the triumph of a united community and the enduring power of living life on your own terms.